Good morning. I am delighted to be here, and I mean that sincerely because a month ago I spoke to luxury travel planners, and that was a tough love talk about the future. But as I was preparing this talk back in Chicago, I was getting really excited to tell you some of what I have learned over the past 5 years in this deep dive of research that I have done on a big social change that will ripple across our society at large. And I'll dive into that in my talk. But for right now, I want to open with a congratulations because it's rare in life when we find ourselves at the right place at the right time. And that is what I believe about libraries. So I want you to turn to your left and congratulate the person on your left. Just say congratulations. Okay. And now I want you, don't leave the person on your right left out. The person on your right, I want you to turn to them and say, right place, right time. Okay, good. So, what I'm going to talk about in my talk today is how digital is really changing who we are and what we want. And this will have profound repercussions. And then I'm going to talk to you about what it means for institutions like libraries. And then I'm going to talk about you, what you can do to up your game and take advantage to maximize what libraries are already doing really well, to take your profession to the next level. Okay, let me tell you a little bit about how I got involved in this research project to begin with. I'm a cultural analyst. That's a weird job. What I do in my job is I identify deep social trends that have the power to open new markets or disrupt traditional markets. And people hire me to look at their industries to help them weed out things they should stop doing and position them to have the right message at the right time for the right people. So, I got this call one day from an engineer from NASA. You know, my knees are knocking a little bit as I'm talking to this engineer. I mean, he's from NASA, and he's from this division within a division within a division that serves the public good and does public information outreach. And they've done their homework, he tells me, and what they've discovered is that the rising generation of millennials, which is a very large swath, is not interested in space exploration. This is not good for their future. So he's wondering, is there a way that they can reposition to be able to reach out to this audience and get them to care about space travel? And so I did what I always do, because I always believe that there's wisdom in the room, you know? And I said, what do you think the problem is? And he said, I guess I wonder if we're still ambitious as a people. And it was that question that sent me down the rabbit hole for 5 years. I examined the canon of how ambition interacts with identity, right? So I went all the way back to the 1930s. Jung, Freud, Erickson. I worked with a team across town in Chicago. One gentleman was from MIT, the other was from the University of Wisconsin, and they had developed an algorithm that had the power to scrape the web across 550 million conversations. And I was able to track 15,000 emotions daily. It had international reach, but I was able to slice and dice it based on demographics. And then I followed the lives of 90 young people to find out how they were forming their identities through digital and what it was meaning for their aspirations, who they wanted to be and what they wanted to achieve in life. That proved to be, by the way, some of the most profound research I've ever done, because we had the glory of these people. We picked up people at different stages in their lives, of course, but we saw people graduate from high school and move into college and get married and get jobs or move into their parents' basement. And here's what we learned. I will just highlight some of the things that will be most important for you to grasp and believe why you're at the right place at the right time. First of all, the institutions that used to confer identity are losing their impact, right? This has to do with institutions that confer job status, 50 and fired. Most people in North America will not only have 7 jobs by the time that they're 45, have held 7 jobs by the time they're 45, but they will also have had at least 4 career changes. Now you think about the people who turn to you in your libraries, right? To help them through these transitions, and you can begin to see how this wave is going to affect you. Family ties that used to confer identity, right? We are seeing the dissolution of the family structure. Location, where you grew up. We are becoming a more and more transient, mobile society. And organized religion, again, a big power to confer ritual and identity associated with those rituals, are also losing their impact. And so it is putting us collectively into this enormous sense of role ambiguity. And I'm writing a book on this research now, and I can tell you I had to devote 2 entire chapters to the power of role ambiguity to flip us out. Because what role ambiguity does to us is it puts us into deep self-doubt. And once you're in deep self-doubt, I can tell you, you begin to operate out of your old brain, right? The oldest part of the brain has everything to do with anxiety, fear, cravings that lead to neurosis. And what it disables is the frontal cortex, and that has to do with reason, decision-making, balance of information, ability to sift through information to find out what's relevant. So it's kind of a perfect cocktail for people to wander and feel very stressed about their identities. Add to that we are now in the business of persona production. 56% of American adults use multiple platforms to express themselves. 76% of adults use Facebook multiple times a day to talk about their lives. We have created a constellation of identities that we are now in the business of grooming and managing. But what I discovered, especially in following the lives of the 90 young people, is that if you think about identity as an onion, and at the core is that native sense of self, and then you have, depending on whether you're Jungian or Freudian, you've got ego, you've got shadow, you've got id. And that final layer of the onion is the persona. And it is the most fragile on an onion. It usually cracks and breaks. And yet that is the layer that we are investing the most of our time and energy and creative resource into. And so it should be no wonder to you that many of the people that you encounter, whether you work with them as colleagues or you serve them as patrons, are emotionally very fragile. And this has led us to this campaign collectively for self-validation, right? How many selfies can we take, right? And then we look at our mobile habits. 95% of Americans own cell phones. 95%. Think about the penetration of that. And 77% of them are smartphones, which means they're able to do lots and lots of things. 10% of us it is our only device. So it's where we watch television. It's where we get our news, which makes us incredibly mobile. It also makes it harder for us to put down roots and have a sense of self that comes out of those roots. So what we are entering as a culture, and this is a worldwide phenomenon, I can tell you, especially when we look at migration patterns. But what I want to talk about is just the North American swath of that. So as we enter this collective identity crisis, what I'd like to inspire you to think about is, as Carl Jung used to say, if we're going to have a crisis, can we make it a fertile crisis? Can we get something out of this? And I'm going to share with you information to help you understand how you, your colleagues, and the people you serve can make this identity crisis a fertile crisis every day in what you do. The big headline is, there is a new relationship between ambition and identity. We are wanting new and different things in our lives, and for different reasons, and it is shaping who we are. And there are 3 parts to this, and I will just headline those for you as well. The rope, the edge part, and the muster. The rope is how we form identity now in a digital age, and it is different from the previous age. The edge part, in finding people that had identity challenges, crises that would blow the doors off of who you think you are, they all had one thing in common. And I'll share that with you. And the muster is how we use this information to work together. All right, let's talk about this business of identity as a rope. We used to think of identity as a yardstick, right? You're born into the world, you're educated, you have influences that change you and form you, you graduate, you get a higher education, you move on to the next level, which is usually finding a spouse or a partner, and you build a family and you build a career, and right? What we're finding is that in the new identity formation model, we will have many strands to our rope. We will have many career experiences. We will have many experiences that mold us and shape us. Some of them will be digital, and some of them will be live. Some of them will be bricks, and some of them will be clicks. But it is in this model of having many strands to our identity that makes us flexible and adaptable. So thinking that you're done if you are pink-slipped, or you need to change your career, all you're doing is adding strands to your rope. And that's where the edge part comes in. The edge part, it turns out, is that emotional muscle, that psychic muscle that makes us very adaptable and very good at change. In other words, people who will succeed will be very, very good at change. Now, why do I have a picture of a woman putting a sheep in the back of her car? One of the people that we followed was a young woman named Camis Davis, and she was a big shot. She had died and gone to heaven. She was writing for Savior magazine, which is, if you're a foodie, it's a pinnacle publication. Traveling the world, meeting with chefs, 26 years old, blogger, top of her game, finds a pink slip in her inbox one day, and her whole life changes. Within 6 months, she's living out of her car and she's borrowing money from friends. Okay, we're back on. We're back live. That felt really dramatic, by the way. Right? You know what? But I can see you now. Okay, so here's what happened. She decided to go to France and work as an apprentice to a butcher. This was a butchery family that had been butchering for generations. They taught her everything they knew. She did this for 2 years, and she returned to the United States, to Portland, Oregon, to found the Portland Meat Collective, which is where people can go to learn how to respectfully butcher animals, right? And these are people who are like-minded, but from all walks of life. So she's adding thread upon thread upon thread to her strand, to her rope, because she has to learn how to community organize. She has to learn how to outreach. She has to learn how to build a business model. And within the first 3 months, all of her classes are sold out. So she's a going concern. And this is where I would like to talk about this notion of the muster. How we will work together will be also a different model. And it will be starting small and tackling big. The muster is based on a military term, right? The military moves in and they attack a big problem with a small, nimble team. Recently, I had a conversation with a client, and I said, well, who's on your advisory committee? 52 people. 52 people. I was overwhelmed, and I didn't even have to run that group, right? I want you to think for a minute about your bureaucracies. I want you to think about the layers that you put between you and change to make things happen. And I want to suggest to you that we do this because we think it keeps us safe. But the whole time we're keeping ourselves safe with bureaucracies and advisory committees of 52 people, what we're really doing is keeping ourselves from growing the muscle of the edge part that would make us good at change. In other words, we're disabling ourselves through the very bureaucracies that we think are keeping us safe and insulated. So, how do you up your game as librarians with this? And I would like to suggest to you, everything starts with the who. Who has everything to do with identity. And institutions that can provide and confer a sense of identity on their user groups will have enormous power. And I think if you look at this recent election cycle in the United States, you will see how this played out. Whether people were conscious of it or not, the more identity they were able to confer by being a participant in a particular party or a party agenda, the better they did, whether they were right or wrong, or whether you agree with them or disagree with them. So what does that mean to start with the who? Well, let's start with our patrons. Who do we want them to be? How do we want them to discover who they are? If we think about setting up our user experience as a path to self-discovery, rather than making it about objects and the Dewey Decimal System, if we focus it around a process of self-discovery, how does that change the way the user experience occurs? How do we help people realize that the library has resources, both technological and traditional, to help people discover who they can be? Let me be more specific. Think about the identity rituals that you can maximize to help people feel a part of something that is true to themselves, as well as to their communities. Things like library cards. Things like Massachusetts, a library in Massachusetts offers users the opportunity to set up focus groups to find out what's going on in the community, to set up clubs and organize them through the library. The libraries only organize it for them, set up the opportunity, and it's actually the patrons who run with it. This confers a lot of identity onto our user base. The next who question is, who do we want to be as colleagues to each other? And again, I interviewed executives from Virgin to BuzzFeed to Yahoo. And what I heard over and over again was small groups, big goals. And who do we want to be as librarians? I can tell you something. Nobody needs more information. They're overwhelmed. And I know that's hard to hear, but what communities do need, some of them need to heal. Some of them need to be able to look ahead. Some of them need to rebuild their downtowns or their main streets, invite economic opportunity, change the identity of the community, to stop being one kind of community and start being another kind of community. Some communities need to prepare for crisis. And if you think about who you want to be as a librarian in that, what role you want to play, you begin to see that your job is really not about just the technology and just the books. In fact, your job becomes a much broader scope of opportunity. And then asking the question, who do we want to be as a community? This photo, by the way, is taken from Reed College. Reed College is a small private college in the western, in a western state, Portland, Oregon area. And the librarians worked with the administration to say, you know what? We want to be the student union. We don't want to just be a library. We don't want to just be a repository. We want to be a place where people meet and can do lots of things. And we want to be able to celebrate their success. This is a photo of the annual thesis parade, where students parade across campus and end up in front of the library, and they hold a big celebration for having written their thesis with the assistance of the librarians. So who you want to be as a community has everything to do with your role as a librarian and the role of the library. So let's say, for instance, that your community wants to be a place where people share their wisdom. Now, what do your services look like? And how do you use your technologies to facilitate that? As much futurism as I engage in and as much data as I look at, it's interesting how often I end up looking backward as much as looking forward. Some of what I'm saying might ring a bell to some of you. But I was reminded as I was preparing for this talk, one of the things I encountered when I was writing my book about the Renaissance generation was the role of bell makers in the building of Gothic cathedrals in Europe. The bell makers would come in last. And what they would do is they would just set up in the middle of town, in the town square, and they never brought material, they never brought the resources with them, they only brought their tools. And they would invite the community to donate broken jewelry and hardware and old pots and pans. And all of this would be smelt to form the bells of the cathedral, so that when that bell tolled, what was resonant in someone's heart and what they heard was that they were a part of that. They had a piece in that. And that's the next wave for institutions, is to become a part of someone's life, to help them become the next person they want to be. And yet, we have these old school ideas, not only about our institutions, but how we form identity. We're still walking around with the yardstick instead of the rope. And so what are the social costs of this? Well, again, I'm going to reflect backward. What happened at that dawn of modern man was that Neanderthals required 5,000 calories a day on average to survive. All right, so that's what Michael Phelps, the swimmer, consumes, right? So it's cold, it's dark, and that pretty much means that you're going to live and you're going to survive on red meat. And what that meant as a business model for Neanderthals is even their expectant women and women carrying children had to be on the hunt. And you can imagine the mortality rate was wicked high. The genesis of modern man figured out that they could reassign roles to the tribe. They could assign roles to older people. They could assign different roles to women. They could assign different roles even to men. And in that, they were able to confer a sense of fluidity within the tribe based on coexistence and co-survival, right? So if we neglect our opportunity, to develop our edge part, to get really good at change, what we threaten to do is to make ourselves extinct long term. Because digital isn't going away. How long has this conference met now? 32 years, right? I mean, back in the days when the earth was still cooling, I was working for ALA and meeting with Al Gore's team, and we were talking about the internet superhighway and how we could wire libraries and how we were going to bend coaxial cable. Right, I know that really dates me, but I'm kind of proud of being a silverback, So anyway, here's our opportunity, right? And how does this now boil down to you? You are not librarians. That isn't really what you do. You help us grow. You help build community. You help make us resilient. And you inspire us. You don't have a job. You have a platform. You have a platform for change. And you are not alone. Look around you. Everybody stand up, please. You are all here. You are on the platform together. Right? I want you to turn to the person on your right. Okay? Shake their hand. Say, right place, right time. Okay? Now I want you to turn to the next person on the other side. Shake their hand. Right place, right time. Okay, have a seat. Thank you. Because here's the deal. You not only have the technology, you not only have the resources, you already know how to change lives. You do this every day. But in some brilliant stroke of opportunity, you're about books, as the OCLC research proves, every few years, the library brand is still about books. And overlaying that is the technology. And it's the perfect intersection. And why is that? Because what people really need now in these times is to be inspired. And it is our imaginations that get raised and expanded through libraries. And so I want to leave you with this. From Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, if you want to build a ship, don't drum up people to collect wood, and don't assign them tasks and work, but rather teach them to long for the endless immensity of the sea. That's your job. And if you want to up your game, that's the platform for the next 20 years.